So joining us here today is Frank Schaefer, and Frank has become, I guess you could call it, would you call yourself an unlikely activist?
Maybe. Yeah,
Maybe.
I like that expression. Unlikely activist, yes.
Unlikely activist, especially for really pushing, I guess, forward rights for the LGBT community. When it comes to church and faith and all of that, you become an outspoken advocate. And so, Frank, give me a little background for people that don't know you about how you kind of found yourself as an unlikely activist.
So I think it all started when my son, Tim, my oldest son, came out to us, my wife and myself, in the year 2000. And that was a bit of a shocker to us. Not so much because we didn't accept him, which we did. We embraced him. But what was shocking about it was his story. And his story was that he had heard from his own church, the United Methodist Church, of which he has been a member ever since he got baptized as a young boy, and which he loved and was so active in. Faith had always been so important to him. So I took him to an annual conference with me. Because he was so interested in the church and was so active at a young age. And it was at that time when he was about 13 years old, when he heard that language, that homophobic language for the very first time. He was already struggling with this orientation, unbeknownst to me. And what he heard on the floor of the annual conference that year was that you can't be homosexual and go to heaven. And it just plunged him into a deep depression. He doubted himself, his faith, and he said to us, he cried himself to sleep most nights, praying to God, please make me, quote unquote, normal. I don't want to go to hell. And at probably the age of 16, 17, when nothing had changed, he actually considered taking his own life. And my wife and I had no idea what he was struggling with. And so we just embraced him at that moment. And I remember there were a lot of tears. And we just said things to him like, you are our son, Tim, and we love you so much, and nothing is ever going to change our love for you. And so let's figure this out together. And so then we said things like, obviously you did not choose this for yourself. To me, this was the definitive proof that this is not a choice, because he fought it. He didn't want to be homosexual. He prayed against it unsuccessfully. And here he was, a homosexual young man and also a Christian. And we said to him, look, this is the way God obviously created you. He loves you the way you are. He created you the way you are. This is who you are. You are a gay man. And so it took him many years before he actually could accept himself for whom God had created him to be. But he did. And he met somebody. He fell in love with Bobby at BU at Boston University when he went. And so after a year and a half of knowing each other, they got engaged. And in the year 2006, I received a phone call from my son asking me if I would preside over his wedding ceremony with Bobby. And that to me was a defining moment as well, because I had to make a decision. And that decision wasn't easy, because I knew that the United Methodist Church obviously didn't condone same-sex marriage. And so to me, this was a moment when I had to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And so to me, it was a moment when my son was reaching out, not only to me as a father, but to me as a minister. And after all that he went through, suffering really from the homophobic doctrine and language of our church, there was no way I could have ever said no to him as a father and as a minister. And I confirmed him, and I said, absolutely, son, it'll be an honor to preside over your wedding ceremony. And so I did. In the year 2007, I did. I didn't make it a big deal. I didn't let anybody know in my congregation, which was in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, very conservative context. I didn't share anything about it because I knew it would divide the congregation. And we had a pretty good ministry going on there. So I decided, not to be an activist at that time. I did let my superintendent know, my bishop, But I didn't hear anything back, so I went ahead with the wedding. I thought maybe since I was transparent to them, to the church leadership, that I might be canned at that time, which didn't happen. So, I went ahead with it, and I went ahead after that with my ministry in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, at the Iona United Methodist Church at the time, for another almost 6 years before a conflict arose in my congregation, and people were looking for ways of getting rid of me. This is actually just a very small portion of the congregation who were trying to do that, and they succeeded, because they did find the record. Somebody actually from that group drove all the way to Boston, Massachusetts, where the wedding happened, in a restaurant, by the way, not even a church. And they found the court record, and they used it as evidence, and there was a complaint against me. Then in the year 2013 is when I faced the church trial, and that was widely publicized. Basically I was given 1 month after this trial to recant from my position and to promise that I would from now on adhere to the discipline, which after 1 month of time of thinking about it, of course, I did not change my mind on that. And it was at that time, a month after the trial, that my credentials were taken. I lost my church. I lost my basically my career, my paycheck, my security, and everything. But what happened then was just amazing. The United Methodist Church, the reconciling part of the United Methodist Church, really reached out to me and my family and invited us and to speak and to be a part of the reconciling ministry, supported us financially. It was just a marvelous experience that really restored my faith in the United Methodist Church, because I think I've seen the United Methodist Church at its worst during my trial, and I've also seen it at its best right after my trial, when the reconciling part of the church reached out to me.
Well, how has this process and all that you've been through, how has it really changed you?
As you can imagine, this has been quite the experience. Not everybody goes through something like that. And quite honestly, I'm still recovering from, emotionally from some of these experiences. In fact, I still have dreams sometimes about this, and I'm still processing this. But it has changed me, because in a way, I've lived in the closet as well. As a parent of 3 gay children, a minister in the United Methodist Church, I never felt that I could speak out. And a part of that is that fear, that culture of fear, that our homophobic language in the discipline, in our book of discipline, and of course the homophobic laws as well, sort of elicits. There is this culture of fear, and I've seen it not only in myself, but I've seen it also in district superintendents, in bishops, many pastors, or people within the church. It's sort of like you can lose everything. You put yourself at risk, you put your career at risk, you put your safety at risk, and it's especially pertinent when you have a young family, when you have children to take care of, and so there is that fear of speaking out, that keeps you back. And when this complaint was filed, I had no more reason to be silent. And in a sense, to me, it was coming out of the closet on my theology, on my true theology, on how I really thought about gay marriage and what I thought theologically about it. I was asked many questions by people from my church, of course, by the press, and so I could finally walk out of that closet and say, okay, here it is. And I became an activist.
And so I love how you were talking about that, how oftentimes it's not just the United Methodist Church, there's this culture of fear that presides, and it's, I believe there's a lot of people in lots of denominations that are kind of, in a certain way, like you had said, kind of in that fear closet. And how do you see change happening? Because I know change is happening. The Supreme Court is now made it legal for everyone to be able to get married now in America. But the church is oftentimes slow to adapt, or slow to change, or slow to adopt change within that. So, I mean, what advice do you have for people that would say that, hey, I'm like you, Frank, I'm in this closet of fear?
Yeah, and that's a very good question to ask, because that fear is very real still, and many people live with it and under it. After what I've gone through, I really encourage people to take a chance, to take the risk, especially now that things are changing in society. You just mentioned the SCOTUS decision just very recently last month, which gives us really a different situation, because now that gay marriage is legal in all 50 states, this is going to affect the church and really challenge the church's position and doctrine in a very, very deep way, because now you have parishioners coming to their minister saying, same-sex couples saying, will you marry us? It is legal in our state. Will you marry us? And that puts a lot of pressure, not only on the ministers, but on the church overall. So for that reason, I think the time is right. The time is here to overcome this fear and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to take a risk. And what I've noticed since my trial, there haven't been any trials on this issue. And I believe it has something to do with my trial, actually, because it was a total PR nightmare for the United Methodist Church. And I can't even imagine what losses the church overall, especially in the United States, has experienced, in real dollar amounts, because people have just withdrawn their support. People have quit their membership. I think there will not be another trial on this issue for any pastor or any church, for that matter. So I think the time is here now to step it up, especially now with the backing of the Supreme Court and the government. I think the time is here to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a little chance. I'm going to do this. I'm going to come out as a minister who's saying I will perform same-sex marriages. So I want to encourage you. Take heart, take courage. I think times have changed enough that the risk is limited, and you only have things to gain from it.
And what I think is great is that after your experience, oftentimes I think most people would just want to say, I'm done with this tribe, after what happened, but you're sticking around. And so what change do you see happening, like in the United Methodist Church?
Honestly, there was a time when I was going through my trial, and when it was becoming obvious that this was not my day in court. The trial was, for lack of a better expression, quite rigged, to be honest. I wasn't allowed on my first day of the trial, which was about finding guilt or innocence. I wasn't allowed any witnesses but myself. I wasn't allowed to argue by orders of the bishop, of the presiding officer, the judge. I wasn't allowed to argue with one portion of the discipline over another, because, quote unquote, you were on trial, not the discipline. So I really had I felt like I had no legal recourse during this trial. And I got so frustrated. At one point, I was asking myself, will I ever set foot into a church? Not even the United Methodist, into a church ever again? Should they defrock me? But what really gave me courage and changed my mind on this was the way our supporters from within the church, and of course there were a lot of supporters from outside of the United Methodist Church, but there were a lot of supporters. Even during my trial, people came out in droves. There were many more supporters than there were opponents of mine at the trial, and it really gave me courage, and it really gave me it really changed my mind towards saying, you know what, I am a United Methodist, and we are not like this as United Methodists. We do not judge people historically. We've always been a people that have been very proud of our diversity, and we need to really fight for that, to get back to that, because, you know, I feel like we've been taken hostage. You know, in 1972, when this homophobic language was first introduced into our Book of Discipline at General Conference, you know, I felt like from that time on, we've been taken into captivity, into homophobic captivity in a sense. But that's not been the case before that. We've always been very, very welcoming as a church. We've been always very diverse as a church, and we've been proud of that diversity. You know? And we need to go back to those roots. And so that's what motivated me to really say, you know what, I'm going to fight for that church that I felt I joined, that church that we were and that we need to become once again.
And so do you see change happening within United Methodist Church now? I mean, because this is you said it right. Like, I mean, this is what A, been a PR nightmare, you know, B, this is hurt them where it hurts the most, in the pocketbook, and this is a problem that we can see is not going away, or an issue that's not going away. And so where do you see change happening in the United Methodist Church?
Well, first of all, I'm seeing it definitely in the attitudes, in terms of saying, you know what, a trial is not going to benefit anybody. And so there have been just resolutions instead of trials, and some of them have been really, really gracious. In the case of Reverend Ogletree, you know, there was basically no punishment whatsoever. The same with Reverend Tweedy, no punishment whatsoever. There were some that received suspensions, like Reverend Garber, but you know, they were minor suspensions, a month, and the Reconciling Ministries Network came through with providing the lack of funds for that month of income. So there haven't been any trials, and that's number one. Number two, I also see a tremendous change now coming out of different annual conferences. I mean, we've always had progressive annual conferences like the New England Conference and Washington, Baltimore, and of course the whole Western jurisdiction seems very progressive, or is very progressive. But what's really encouraging me is that just recently we had a couple of resolutions come out of the Great Plains region, which, by the way, are presided over by a rather conservative bishop, Scott Jones. That's been tremendous to see that this conference is now saying, you know, we want to rethink this, and we want to accept our LGBTQ members within our church, and we want to fight for their rights. That to me was a tremendous statement, and I rejoice over that, because that is real change in an area that you didn't expect that from, in a conference that you didn't expect that from. So I think changes are happening within the United Methodist Church, and I can only imagine that the SCOTUS decision will also accelerate that change, because we are now talking about this issue more than ever before, and I think I'm seeing the discussion becoming productive and becoming less filled with animosity, and more with people sitting down around the table, saying, how do we solve this? Where do we go from here? Acknowledging that, you know, that this is a matter of conscience, not only for one side, but for both sides, for the conservative side as well as the progressive side. So how do we solve this? How do we get to a place where we can all maybe not be in agreement, but at least get to a point where we can agree to disagree and do ministry mutually, you know, in both cases, where we can do ministry in a meaningful way, based on our heart and conscience. And how can we somehow find a way into the future so that we can stay together as a church, but that we can also incorporate, you know, every people group? Because in a sense, I feel even conservatives aren't saying, I'm not hearing this from conservatives, that they're saying that they want to exclude the LGBT community. Mm-hmm. They realize they're in the church, they're our children, our relatives, they're our members, and they don't want to exclude them. They want to find a way to make this all happen and possible in a way that everybody can feel welcomed, but yet that sensitivities can still be maintained.
And so beginning to look at that, because I love how you were just talking about, this idea of reconciliation, people really being able to sit around a table and have hopefully a humane and respectful conversation. But as it happened as soon as the Supreme Court's decision went down, and I don't know if you follow it at all, but like Facebook, Twitter, everything just lit up, and it lit up in beautiful ways. It also lit up in very ugly ways as well too. And so I think that there are large pieces of the whole Christian population and culture that I would say are not handling this decision very gracefully. And part of this is we had you on the show because we've been talking through a different series of topics of things that the church is not really willing to talk about or handle very well. And how do you see, how do you see Christians being able to move to a place where we can sit across the table from one another, where we can kind of limit this? I don't know. It seems like that in a lot of the Christian sphere, everything's become so polarizing, and we've pushed ourselves so far to each side on topics that we are no longer able to have conversations and realize that wait, we're supposed to be brothers and sisters in Christ. Like why are we treating one another like this? And so, what advice would you give for being able to strike better dialogue, better conversations, to trying to get past all this rhetoric? How do you see change happening in the church at large in America?
I definitely believe that we need to show grace on both sides of the issue. We need to come together as brothers and sisters, acknowledge that we are brothers and sisters, which we are, at heart, and we know that. And we have to show just a lot of grace and understanding. Let's face it. I have evolved on the issue, and it took me many years to do so, because at one point, I was taught by the church that I attended growing up that homosexuality was a sin, and that's what I believed at one point. And I think we have to allow people to really engage on the issue and take part in debates and really give them time to study up and meet somebody and talk to somebody who's gay or lesbian, transgender, bisexual, or queer. And so we need to have grace. We need to have understanding. And we also have to understand as progressives that there is a fear on the conservative side as well. And that fear is that we're getting off keel here we're getting away from the Bible, from the biblical message. And we have to show understanding for that as well, because these are matters of the heart. These are matters of salvation, right? And this is significant, and we have to acknowledge, we see that fear, and we understand that fear, and we want to affirm you, that you are a person of integrity, and that you're having a problem with this because you are a person of integrity and you try to live out your faith according to the biblical record and so forth. So we have to really make those statements to our conservative brothers and sisters, and also allow them time and grace, and show a lot of grace as well. Now, one of the things that really encouraged me just recently at our annual conference here in the CalPAC conference, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a motion on the floor to actually make our entire conference a reconciling conference, which by the way passed, which, yay, I'm so proud of my new conference and the Western jurisdiction in general. And our bishop, of course, Bishop Carcanio, is just an incredible leader. But there was a point, even in the progressive conferences, there are people that are in disagreement. And so there was a point when one lady got up, a minister got up and said, this is a problem, not only for me, but I know plenty of people in our conference. We have a problem with this. What are we going to do? and she suggested to add language that would say we are not all in agreement with this, but we are in debate about it, in a positive, engaging, and constructive debate. And I remember a brother getting up at annual conference right after she spoke, who identified himself as gay, and he said, "You know what? I am absolutely for this statement because we need to show grace." And you have to understand that that was a grace that was not afforded us progressives, because that statement we have tried to get in to the discipline for years, for many, many years, and it was never granted us. And so to hear this gay brother say, we need to acknowledge that, we need to have grace. And I was blown away. I was in tears. And I thought, that is an example of grace in action. And that's what we need to show, all of us, on both sides of the issue. We need to come together in grace, acknowledging that this is a difficult struggle for all of us, and come together showing respect and grace.
I think you're right. I think that's something that gets lost in the arguing and the posturing that tends to happen a lot of times, that I think that we've forgotten how to wrestle well, with topics with each other. And yeah, I just wanted to really just kind of have just one last question for you. And now that you are, like we'll say, you're an activist, and how or what advice can you give people as you walk through this? Because, being in any type of activism, you're going to have the haters. You're going to have those that are pretty vocal and sometimes vile coming back at you. And how do you handle it? How do you respond to it? How do you walk it out in grace?
Mm-hmm. Well, whenever I get a chance to personally engage, I do so with that same grace. I really try to show people, look, I know where you're coming from because I've been there. Okay, so, but what would you do if you had 3 gay children? I always try to make it very personal and let people know that I don't judge them, that I'm praying for them, and I just try to engage them. You will have some that are, as you say, vile, that seem, or you may even get some threats, which I did as well. That's a cost that you have to pay, more so than anything else nowadays. But that's the cost of activism. That's what you have to expect, and you could even take it as a positive. There is a great Native American saying that the greatness of a person is measured not by their friends, but by the number of their enemies. So if you get those threats, if you get those nasty emails or letters, most of them are educational anyway, with lots of scripture and highlighted and all that. Know that you're doing the right thing. You're a great person, doing the right thing. Really, what you are is you're a prophet, and your voice will be heard, and your voice will be especially heard and appreciated by the LGBTQ community, as well as their allies, their family members, and they will love you for it more so than what you receive in hate mail.
Well, Frank, I just want to thank you so much, for your time. You've got a book out, Defrocked, which goes through your story. And tell me what's next on the horizon for you.
The next on the horizon is General Conference. That's been on my mind, ever since I became an activist. And we're just so hoping and praying and preparing for a change, and I'm hoping that will happen. To be honest with you, I don't know if I could live as a United Methodist minister another 4 years after 2016, with our church maintaining the position it holds now. I think for the American United Methodist Church, it would be suicide to do that, and I think people start feeling that pressure, and so we're hoping and praying for change, and that's what we're working toward.
Well, I'm excited. You said it's in 2016 is what the next one is?
Yes, May of 2016 in Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just, again, want to thank you. Really, what you're doing is very heroic, and you were just a gracious person, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.